In the journals of Captain James Cook, the British naval captain and explorer who made 3 tenacious voyages in the later 1700s, there is a passage related to the obscure methods of weather prediction used by the native Tahitian people of the Polynesian islands, a people who could navigate several hundred leagues of water by day and night on certain single or double-masted canoes. Of their capacity to foretell from which quarter a future wind will blow, Captain Cook says they have several methods, but that he knows only of one. By studying the apparent curvatures of the Milky Way, a Tahitian navigator could predict a corresponding wind the following day. Of their rules, says Cook, I shall not pretend to judge, but I know that, by whatever means, they can predict the weather, at least the wind, with much greater certainty than we can. We learn also of their prodigious knowledge of the nighttime sky and internal memorization of the placement of the stars and corresponding seasons, as well of their belief in the immortality of the soul, the supreme and subordinate divinities, and, of course, of their particular class of priest, the Tahoa. The Tahoa maintained both the spiritual and natural wisdom of the people, and it was to the Tahoa that you would come to be consulted on the gods and the unseen world. For as long as there have been practices of spiritual devotion and religious hierarchies, whether in tribal, nomadic, urban, or temple settings, there have been those who serve as vessels of providence, guides and wisdom keepers, human channels whereby the flow of prophecy and oracular direction are brought into the world from a greater realm of knowing. These people have attuned themselves to the subtle voices of the spirits, and the methods for hearing what the gods or spirits have to say and discerning their signs in the natural world are quite varied. Whether it took a state of trance, psychedelic frenzy, magical incantation, or pure instinctual sensitivity, there have been many professed behaviors which can provide the oracle or the prophet a certain capacity for mediating between worlds. The Native Americans had their medicine men, who generally speaking were healers, religious counselors, and possessed the means to predict events through the natural signs of weather and animals, and guided younger generations into direct contact with the spirits through traditions like that of the sweat lodge rite of passage. Often when we attempt to scan the obscure silhouettes of prehistoric religion, we approach that wide field of phenomena collected under the term of shamanism. The word shaman, reduced to its simple definition, means one who knows, and shamans in their many capacities have included men, women, and children. Strictly, shamanism applies to the early religious cultures of northern Asia, but has come to be used to explain indigenous spiritual practices from Aboriginal Australia to Africa, the Arctic, and the Amazon. Shamanism is not easily separated from ritual ceremony, animism, and ecstasy, which in themselves were arguably ubiquitous among early spiritual cultures. In the ethnographic account of spiritual practices in Malaysia at the start of the 20th century, written by the English scholar and Orientalist R.O. WINSTEDT, we learn, for instance, that, quote, the main tasks of the Siberian shaman are healing and divination. His familiar spirit or spirits possessing him, their medium, descend at a seance to cure the sick, avert evil, foretell the future, or answer inquiries. By autosuggestion, the shaman falls or pretends to fall into a trance, and is possessed by spirits who speak through his mouth. All these are features of the Malay seance, which resembles very closely that of the Mongol shaman, even in details of ritual, the beating of a tambourine, wild singing, the rustle and voices of invisible spirits, the expulsion or sucking out of the spirit of disease, the medium on return to consciousness oblivious of what has passed, the offerings made to spirits. To approach a more informed view of divine to human communications, we must agree upon the established fact that all manner of divination and prophesying existed, and served legitimate functions in the local religion, never mind what factuality we might ascribe to them. The practice of seeking knowledge of the future by unknown or supernatural means is known as divination. In the ancient world, there were no shortage of colorful and quite strange divinatory procedures. In the biblical texts, we find numerous examples of lot casting or kleromancy. Casting lots could mean anything from rolling die to shaking up bone fragments and letting them fall onto a parchment with different symbols painted over it. This practice could help make hard decisions and allowed some lot casters to believe that God had intervened in the result to inform the decision. Thus, rather than leaving it up to chance, there is biblical precedence, at least in Proverbs 16:33, to imply divine influence. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. Acts 1:26 shows too that the 11 apostles casted lots to see who would replace Judas. There is also mentioning of lots in Matthew, Jonah, Numbers, Chronicles, and more. And important to note is chapter 14 of Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, where Paul writes of speaking in tongues and prophecies with an attempt to distinguish between the two and the value they each provide. This precedent would be important to later Christian leaders who discuss oracles favorably. Quote, "Seek love, but strive also after other spiritual gifts, especially prophecy. For he who speaks in tongues is talking with God, not with people. For no one understands him. He speaks mysteries in a state of inspiration. But when someone prophesies, he speaks to the people and gives them spiritual strength, encouragement, and comfort." Scholars have tried, at least since Cicero, to classify two types of divination. The first category is technical or inductive methods that involve systemization of signs and omens by observing physical objects, like extispicy or reading the liver or other innards of animals, and astrology, lot casting, bird divination, oil divination, etc. And the second, intuitive or inspired or non-inductive methods, such as dreams, visions, and prophecy. I include in the second category psychic divination and clairvoyance. We get the term divination from the Latin word divinare, to predict, and for ancient prophecies to be vindicated, it is not as if they should be made by fallible humans, but by the gods through humans. In Greek, the word prophetess means literally a person who speaks for someone else, thus one who is possessed or inspired or in an ecstatic state, in the sense that ecstasis means stepping out of oneself. The philosopher and disciple of Socrates, Xenophon, explains how the state of sleep, which opens the door for dreams, is made available because we have freed ourselves from our usual limitations. Quote, "It is in sleep that the soul really shows its divine nature. It is in sleep that it enjoys a kind of insight into the future, and this apparently happens because it is completely free in sleep." The Book of Daniel makes clear the importance and yet the unreliability and caution around oneiromancy, or divination from dreams, which the Greek historian Plutarch called the oldest oracle. There is actually a fascinating book from the 2nd century AD written by Artemidorus, titled The Art of Judging Dreams. Artemidorus here addresses the accusation of falsehood heaped onto many seers and augurs of the marketplace. But Artemidorus actually lives among these seers in various Greek cities and those in Italy and Asia Minor, and says he acquired every available book on the subject. Artemidorus divides dreams into the allegorical and theorematic. Quote, "Theorematic are those whose fulfillment resembles the vision they offer. A traveler dreamed that he has shipwrecked, and this is what happened. As soon as sleep left him, the ship was sucked down and wrecked, and he, with a few others, saved his life with difficulty. Another man dreamed that he was wounded by a man with whom he had agreed to go hunting the next day. As they left together, he was wounded on the shoulder, just as it had happened in the dream." Artemidorus goes on to give many examples of this kind, and it reminds me when I was with some friends in South Carolina for a solar eclipse. A patron of the channel and I parked my truck in Charleston and slept in it to avoid the hotels. I woke up out of a dream that I was being surrounded and getting into trouble for sleeping in the truck, and when I opened my eyes, there were people behind the truck setting up market tents, and one of them was approaching my window. Once I had a dream of someone I hadn't spoken to, let alone thought about, for 15 years, only to wake up to a message from them and a picture that was the same scene I saw in the dream. I also have friends who have shared dreams together, 3 women who independently verified the same shared dream, and another friend who recently dreamed of an old Victorian-era hotel, which days later he was suddenly invited to take a tour of, even though he had not seen or heard of the exact building ever before. I include this to point out that just like there were practices to interpret dreams everywhere in the ancient world, dream phenomena are hardly relics of the past. Incidentally, in the account of Artemidorus, we learn that throughout Greco-Roman cities in the 2nd century, one could readily find dream interpreters in the marketplace, seers behind booths or under awnings, and subject to a wide amount of public scorn, all of which are details we could apply to the modern fortune tellers. Now let's turn back the clock centuries prior to biblical David, when the Hittite Empire ruled most of Asia Minor from Upper Mesopotamia to the northern Levant around the 14th century BC, and fell victim to a plague. Mursili II inherited the consequences of that plague, which also claimed the life of his father, the king. In a prayer addressed to the storm god Hatti, Mursili II pleads that no more death come to those who offer bread and libations, saying, "If people have been dying because of some other reason, then let me either see it in a dream, or let it be established through an oracle, or let a man of God declare it, or, according to what I instructed all the priests, they shall regularly sleep holy. O storm god of Hatti, save my life. Let the gods, my lords, show me their divine power. Let someone see it in a dream. Let the reason for which people have been dying be discovered." Excavations of the ancient city of Martti, located on the western bank of the Euphrates, only a few miles from the modern Iraqi border, some 15,000 cuneiform tablets were found, in which we find more evidence for divination from dreams, predating 1760 BC, when the city was destroyed by Hammurabi, the king of Babylon. From this material, we find that the line of communication from the prophet or the dreamer to the king was not direct, but there were many go-betweens, and dreams could contain many omens, including the apparent likelihood of invasion from hostile neighbors. As well, we find on tablets that prophetesses in the temple, such as the temple of Anunnakam, would go into trance before proclaiming the words of the god. Trance, frenzy, mania, and ecstasy, therefore, are foundational characteristics of the ancient prophetic oracle, and are often preludes to the channeler getting into that state of being which transforms them into a mouthpiece of the gods. In the 5th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, Enkidu and Gilgamesh are approaching a cedar forest to kill a demon, and Enkidu, in one place, encourages Gilgamesh by saying, "Be furious, like a prophet, go into frenzy." This frenzy could be the same mania ascribed to the most famous oracle in the Western world, the oracle at Apollo's temple at Delphi, on top of Mount Parnassus. She is the Pythia, the name for any of the Delphic prophetesses who were consulted by foreigners from all around the known world. About her, Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic philosopher, says, "She is in trance, does not smile, speaks in inarticulate, harsh sounds, but she is in touch with the god." Now we can better understand why the early Christian church classified the 3 specific gifts of, quote, being filled with the Spirit. 1, prophecy, 2, speaking in tongues, which is called glossolalia, and 3, the power of healing. The very real phenomena of glossolalia is seen when someone speaks a foreign language they never personally came in contact with. This can also include inarticulate sounds, ungrounded in any language at all, or the kind of madness associated with demonic possession. Iamblichus, the Neoplatonist and Theurgus, writing in the 3rd and 4th centuries, says in his work on the mysteries of Egypt that this phenomenon, therefore, is a kind of possession, and it happens in this way. There is another kind of divination, well known and very impressive. It has many components and is inspired by a god. It is the oracle. Iamblichus then goes on to describe 3 different accounts of well-known oracles. For instance, the priests of Apollo at Clarus at Colophon in western Anatolia are said to drink water from a certain subterranean spring on prescribed nights, which gives them the oracular power. Now Iamblichus goes further, saying, "And yet not the whole inspiration that the god offers comes from the water. The water only produces an aptitude and a purification of the luminous spirit in us, through which we become capable of receiving the god. It was due to an oracle from Claros that, according to Pausanias, Alexander the Great re-established the city of Smyrna. Iamblichus then describes the prophetess at Delphi, the most famous place for oracles in the Greek world, from where the inscription "Know thyself" became so popular. The prophetess at Delphi is said to oracle through a thin, fire-like spirit that rises from a crevice, which had been speculated and thus far disproven to have been a geochemical gas. She sits in the sanctuary on a bronze tripod, and a fiery intensity surrounds her, coming out of the crevice, filling her with divine radiance. Quote, as a result of both preliminaries, she becomes completely the possession of the god. The third oracles he describes are those of the Branchidae, or the Didyma near Miletus in western Anatolia. Here a prophetess bathes and fasts for 3 days before her stay in the inner sanctuary, wherein she dips or inhales vapors of a kind of water and wields a wand said to have originally been handed down by the god. Elsewhere we learn how the oracle at Patras prayed, burned incense, and gazed into a mirror in a well to help induce the altered state. One of the enduring challenges in the Greco-Roman world was, however, the interpretation of oracular pronouncements. One famous case is the oracular statement given to Croesus, the last king of Lydia, who ruled from 560 to 547 BC, the same Croesus who became known as one of the richest men who ever lived. Herodotus says Croesus was the first of the barbarians who had dealings with the Greeks, forcing some to pay tribute and entering alliances with others. Croesus famously tested out all the major oracles of the Greek world, apparently asking them all, "What is Croesus, son of Aliatus, king of the Lydians, doing at this moment?" According to Herodotus, only the Delphic oracle correctly answered that he was cooking a tortoise and a lamb in a bronze cauldron. Quote, I know the number of the grains of sand and the extent of the sea, and understand the mute and hear the voiceless. The smell has come to my senses of a strong-shelled tortoise, boiling in a cauldron together with a lamb's flesh, under which is bronze and over which is bronze. Once Croesus learned of the rising threat of the Persian Empire in the east, he sought out the Delphic oracle again, receiving the oracular statement that roughly read, "If you make war on the Persians, you will destroy a great empire." The statement seems simple enough, if only Croesus had interpreted that the empire in question was not the Persian Empire, but his own. As the tradition goes, the full meaning of the oracular statement was made clear when Lydia was subjugated by the Persians and Croesus was taken captive. The problem is, of course, if he had defeated the Persians, the statement would have been seen as predicting the future as well, without irony or ambiguity. And it is easy to suggest, but not to substantiate, that the Delphic oracle was simply playing into Croesus' hands due to the lavish gifts the king made to the sanctuary. But of course there is less ambiguous oracular pronouncements and prophecies given by the Delphic oracle. Solon, the famous Athenian lawgiver living in the 6th century BC, credited the oracle for its support in capturing the island of Salamis, and later in his efforts to reform the laws of Athens. Diogenes Laertius, one of the biographers of Pythagoras, also includes a statement that would have us believe Pythagoras learned much of his own moral doctrines from the Delphic priestess. We learn from the 1st century Roman historian Suetonius, in his The Lives of the Caesars, that Emperor Nero was given a warning about a 73rd year from the Delphic priestess. Quote, and after consulting the oracle at Delphi, and being told that he must look out for the 73rd year, assuming that he would die only at that period, and taking no account of Galba's years, he felt so confident not only of old age, but also of unbroken and unusual good fortune, that when he had lost some articles of great value by shipwreck, he did not hesitate to say, among his intimate friends, that the fish would bring them back to him. The apparent true result of this 73rd year warning, however, came in the form of a 73-year-old Galba, who became the Emperor of Rome for several months following the death of Nero. Now, although Apollo was the god of oracles par excellence, and often prophetesses were speaking under his influence, another important oracular center in northern Greece was Dodona, where the priestesses were the intermediators for the oracles of Zeus Neos, the patron deity of Dodona. Lead tablets survive dating from around 550 to 167 BC, and the majority of some 4,216 inscriptions contain the question of a consultant who might ask advice on anything from slaves and marriage to health and travel destinations. One such inscription asks, "Should I marry another woman?" The existence of these lead tablets offer more concrete evidence for the manner of oracular transmission, whereas for the Delphic oracles we rely mainly on voluminous hearsay from second-hand sources. Even the Neoplatonist philosopher Plutarch, who was himself a priest at the temple in Delphi, does not give a personal account of what oracular advice he may have received, if any, during his lifetime, or what pronouncements he may have witnessed. But the Pythia by no means could be compared to the modern-day psychic readers who take customers as readily as they come. Oracular pronouncements were not given during the winter months, and for each other month they were given on the 7th day after the new moon. And as Plutarch pointed out when explaining why there were far less oracles in his day due to a smaller population, we could expect many aspects of the oracles at Delphi to have been subject to change, considering oracular activity may have taken place at Delphi for nearly 1,000 years. Now there was another female oracle at Cumae called the Sibyl, a name which especially stuck in the Judeo-Christian tradition and at times is a general reference to many ancient oracles. The Sibyl at Cumae, which was an early Greek colony on mainland Italy dating back to at least the 8th century BC, gave Apollonian oracles in a cave, apparently writing them on oak leaves. The Sibyl has been cemented in the Roman religious history, due also to her proximity to Rome and her treatment in the poems of Virgil, Ovid, and Lucan. There is a tale about certain Sibylline books that depict the legendary last king of Rome, Tarquinius, who declined to purchase 9 Sibylline books from the Cumaean Sibyl. When she destroyed 3 of them, he still declined, but after burning 3 more, he agreed to pay the same exorbitant price first offered for all 9 books. Long after the books were stored in a vault under the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill in Rome, where they were tightly protected by the Senate, they were apparently destroyed partially in a fire in 83 BC, and later totally burned by order of the Roman general Flavius Stilicho in the later 4th century AD. Not much, if anything, is known about the earlier Sibylline books, and these books are not the same as the collection known as the Sibylline Oracles. This collection of oracles, by the reckoning of scholars, is questionable in terms of date and authorship, and are generally regarded as forgeries composed somewhere between the 2nd and the 6th centuries AD. What is remarkable about this collection, however, is the kind of hodgepodge tapestry of Greco-Roman myths interwoven with Jewish legends like the Garden of Eden and the Tower of Babel, and flourishes of Gnostic and Christian beliefs. Heraclitus of Ephesus famously compared himself to the Sibyl, quote, who speaking with inspired mouth, without a smile, without ornament, and without perfume, penetrates through centuries by the power of the gods. This collection covers everything from the creation of the world, the first sin, the prophecy of Christ, the fall of Rome, the singularity of the one God, and much more. The first 5 lines read, "Beginning with the generation first of mortal men down to the very last, I'll prophesy each thing which has been, and what is now, and what shall yet befall the world through the impiety of men." Now certain early Christian church fathers like Augustine, Justin Martyr, and Lactantius quoted from the so-called Sibylline oracles. And whether or not the collection we just quoted from actually contains any of the earlier Sibylline books that were destroyed, we may never know. Lactantius, one of the most reprinted church fathers born in 240 AD, uses certain Sibylline pronouncements aligning with Christian beliefs to try and demonstrate that even among pagans there were accounts of the same truths which the Christians now profess. You can find similar patterns among the Christian apologists, such as Clement of Alexandria. The apologists often mined numerous examples where the ancient philosophers occasionally struck truths, so long as those truths were in alignment with the developing Christian dogma. Of course, when they were not in alignment, one could expect fervent criticism. Lactantius wrote in his Divine Institutes, quote, "Marcus Varro, than whom no man of greater learning ever lived, says that the Sibylline books were not the production of one Sibyl only, but that they were called by one name Sibylline, because all prophetesses were called by the ancients Sibyls, either from the name of one, the Delphian priestess, or from their proclaiming the counsels of the gods. Taking after Cicero's On the Nature of the Gods, where Cicero points out how many different versions of the same Greek gods there were, and how there was no shortage of disagreement about what the gods actually were, Lactantius also lists 10 different Sibyls, and agreeable to his Christian purposes, he writes, quote, "All these Sibyls then proclaim one God." Now in these verses which the ambassadors brought to Rome are these testimonies respecting the one God. One God who is alone, most mighty, uncreated. But there is one only God of preeminent power, who made the heaven and sun and stars and moon and fruitful earth and waves of the water of the sea. Worship him who is alone the ruler of the world, who alone was and is from age to age. Lactantius concludes here saying, quote, "I would now follow up the testimonies of the others, were it not that these are sufficient. But since we are defending the cause of truth before those who err from the truth and serve false religions, what kind of proof ought we to bring forward against them, rather than to refute them by the testimonies of their own gods?" In a similar vein, a quote from the work Horatory Addresses to the Greeks, attributed to Justin Martyr, reads, "You may very easily learn the true religion, in some part at least, from the ancient Sibyl, who teaches you through her oracles by certain powerful inspiration things which seem to be near to the teaching of the prophets." In conclusion, we should take heed of oracular divination and its many mysteries, much for the same reason Xenophon suggests. What is hidden from mortals we should try to find out from the gods by divination, for to him that is in their grace the gods grant a sign. Much like we should take caution with the same, as Cicero suggests in his treatise on divination. Now, the existence of oracles is by no means limited to a few regions or to the same antiquated religious epoch. The Nechung oracle is still today the personal oracle consulted by the Dalai Lama, the head of the Yellow Hat Order of Tibetan Buddhists. This Buddhist oracle is consulted to prophesy events in no ways unlike the ancient oracles of Greece, Rome, and the Near East. Divination of this sort implies an agency of the gods to many. To others, it was evidence that the individual can, through various means, enter a state of being which aligns their soul to an inner divine knowing, bypassing the limitations of the flesh. For all of us, it should demonstrate that there is so much more to the intricacies of human life, to the creative imagination and the states of being, which allow us to express art, literature, and ideas that we cannot readily feel to be attributed solely to ourselves. We could fill many videos quoting the various disagreements or potential explanations of how oracular pronouncements actually worked, from Xenophon to Posidonius to Plutarch, Strabo, and Cicero. It is always fascinating to see how universal realities, such as the global practice of various forms of divination, can either be limited by the confines of our present worldview and our personal notions of what's possible, or exaggerated in order to account for whatever alleged anomaly we wish to explain. But what is always more important than these particulars is the mysterious existence of the thing itself. The how is intriguing, but the what and why makes a far greater impact. And there will be times in our lives where we are struck by a sign that is not ambiguous at all, but quite clear with its message. With oracles and divination practices, we check the box for another example of independent religions and isolated cultures emphasizing the spiritual function of the same existences, whether it be the hidden messages in dreams, the words spoken by a shaman or a prophetess during an oracular ceremony, or the divine signs perceived in the stars or in animate objects. The world is brimming with signals of the divine and voices of the gods. I wonder then what might be possible if we stopped dismissing it all and instead quieted the mind, opened our eyes, and listened to the mystery. If you would like to support the channel and help keep us as active as we can on these subjects, consider supporting my Patreon through the link in the description below. A major goal of this channel is to familiarize you with the sources of ancient esoteric philosophy and comparative religion. From this foundation, we can all the better approach the ancient religions and the great mystery of our lives today. With that, be well. See you soon.